Hey guys, it's me, Jen Blanchard, botanist and your host of Botanica Broadcast. And today I'm here to talk about this plant right above my head, which is actually growing on another plant. So this is the Resurrection Fern. And of course the bells are gonna go off right when I start filming, but we're gonna keep going. So this is Pleopeltis polypodioides, which is the Resurrection Fern. And it's growing on a oak tree, and that's generally how we see them in Louisiana. They're growing on the branches and boughs of the live oak, which so not parasitic though. It's a fern and it's growing here, and I don't know much about their symbiosis or their relationship, you know, whether it's a mutualistic relationship or just communalism, something like that. But what I do know is that this plant is named the Resurrection Fern because, much like Christ, he died and then was resurrected. This plant appears dead, and it did yesterday. Yesterday, this plant looked just like this. Every single one of these was dehydrated. These fronds was dehydrated and looked like it was dead. And then last night it rained, and I knew if I came back out here it would look like this, green and lush and alive. So it has been resurrected just with a little rain shower. And this plant is used traditionally medicinally, was used by the Aztecs in Mexico, Central America, and then also Cuba, and by the Homa tribe here in Louisiana. And in Homa French, it's called capillard or capillard. I don't speak French, you'll have to correct that, but it means capillary or hair. These ferns they have spores on the backside, so, and those are in the sori, which you can see, I hope, right there. And that's how they reproduce. Another thing I want to tell you is that how they were used medicinally, generally to treat fever. They have antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. But I do think that the ferns are one of the most understudied plant groups. I would say ferns and grasses are some of the most understudied plant groups for medicinal purposes, because I think people are more attracted to flowering plants, and the flowering plants were studied further or more in depth than some of the fern species. But this is a medicinal fern that was used traditionally in medicine, and different species of the same genus were also used medicinally in a similar way. And so I think there's a lot to be learned about the ferns and their medicinal purposes. And when I was at Botany 2025 recently in Palm Springs, I met a lot of people who study ferns. They're members of the Fern Society, and I'm thinking about joining because I would love to connect and do more research on the medicinal properties of fern species. So yeah, I just wanted to tell you about that. And you know, I'm fortunate that we have these big oak trees here on LSU's campus. This one's probably a good 200, 250 years old with the DBH, which is the diameter at breast height. That's how we kind of generally figure out how old trees are. We use the crown and some other things, but looking at this one, I'd say it's a good 200, maybe 250. And you know, we're fortunate to have these. You're not likely to plant this plant in your garden or landscape. If you have a live oak, you might be fortunate enough to already have it growing on your tree. You may be able to move some, like transplant it onto your oak tree. I'm not sure about that. Maybe I'll talk to one of the horticulturists that I'm friends with about that and how that would work. But it is a really cool plant. Maybe I'll show you this as well. So this is the Resurrection Fern, and just above that there is some of this plant, which is ball moss. That's Tillandsia, which is a bromeliad, and it's actually an invasive species, and we have a problem with that on campus as well. There's several research studies going on to try and figure out the best way of getting rid of the ball moss, but it's all over our crepe myrtles and some of our oak trees. So, but back to our Resurrection Fern, that is a native. and it was used by the Homa tribe in traditional Aztec medicine, and in Cuba and Mexico it was used traditionally, culturally, as a medicine. And so yeah, medicinal ferns, resurrection fern, the story of the resurrection of Christ is where it gets its name. And yesterday, like I said, it was completely dehydrated. You thought it was dead, but it's not, much like me and this PhD that I'm working on. I'm not dead yet, although they try. So it's still alive and still flourishing and still doing all of its wonderful photosynthetic work. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube for more Botanica